So my name is Dr. Jennifer Lesesne, and I'm honored to be here on July 13th, 2015 with Ms. Ruth Lesesne. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed as part of this South Carolina Mother of the Year Association Oral History Project.
I'm glad to cooperate.
Thank you for being here. Let's start by just having you tell us a little bit about when and where you were born and raised, maybe a little bit about your early childhood.
Okay, I was born in 1938, which is toward the end of the Depression, I guess, and right before World War II. I was born in a little textile town called 96, South Carolina. It's very small. We lived there, and then as the war started then, when I was 4, I guess, we moved to, my dad worked in shipyards. So we lived in Panama City, Florida, and Brunswick, Georgia. But it's funny to me now to look back and think, we could not wait to get back to this little town of 96. We just thought that was just going to be the greatest thing. And we did go back. And it was great to grow up in a small town, go into a very small high school. Of course, at that point, it was segregated. But I was the youngest of 3 girls, and, you know, money was always a little bit tight, so, but, you know, it didn't matter at that point. Nobody really had a lot. Mm-hmm. We did not live, my dad did not work in the textile mills, so I see now, looking back, there was a it was distinguished between town people and mill people, as they were called, and yet some of my best friends, of course, lived at the mill. And I was the youngest of 3 girls. My mother ended up teaching school after a while, so she was a school teacher as I was growing up. And my dad did different things, but had a brickyard and then a lumber company. So that's what he ended up doing.
Tell us about your education and your young adult life, and maybe within that time period, what were your dreams, your goals, and your aspirations as a young woman?
You know, I think girls back then didn't really have the goals and dreams that girls today have, which I think is just wonderful that women have so many choices now. I grew up thinking, I just guess I'll be a school teacher. But after I went to Columbia College, which is an all-girls school in Columbia, my freshman year. My 2 older sisters had gone to a little school called Erskine College. It was in a little town called Due West, not far from 96, where I grew up and graduated from high school. And while I was at Columbia College, I don't know, I think another friend and I just started really talking about what we wanted to do. So I decided I wanted to go to medical school. So I got some information about medical school. But at that point, my dad started having financial difficulties. Erskine was closer, and it was just a little bit cheaper, and I got a little bit better scholarship. I had been the valedictorian of my high school of 30 people, so I don't know how important that is, but anyway.
We have a lot in common. I was the youngest of 3 girls, and I was valedictorian of my high school.
Oh, but I bet you had a lot more than 30 people in your graduating class. But anyway, so because of the valedictorian business, I got a little scholarship. So anyway, I ended up transferring to Erskine, and as I said, my 2 older sisters had graduated from Erskine, and the one closest to me just loved Erskine. They both did, but my middle sister really did, and had known this young man, this high school boy actually, in Due West, and his dad actually was the president of Erskine, but he was a neat guy. And Louise, my middle sister, always said, "Ruth, you just need to come and meet Joe Lesesne." So we actually made a trip in the spring. She still had friends. My sister still had friends there because she had graduated a year early. And so we went back and stayed with one of her friends. And I actually saw this guy, but we never really talked. But then that summer when my family just decided I needed to go on and transfer. So I ended up going to summer school at Erskine that summer, and then I went to Erskine in the fall and met this guy, Joe Lesesne. And so anyway, we ended up dating and we ended up getting married. So I credit my middle sister with picking out my husband. But I went to Erskine and scheduled all these science classes because I was still going to medical school, but that soon fell by the wayside. And Joe was a history major, so I thought, oh well, I'll just be a history major too, because I had always liked that. I had a wonderful history teacher in high school. So ended up majoring in history. We got married. I was going to finish early too. My dad, as I said, had some financial problems, and so he just thought we all should finish in 3 years, and so we all did. So I graduated a year before Joe, but we ended up getting married in the middle of what was his junior year, in the middle of my senior year. So then I taught school the next year while he graduated from college. Then we went to Columbia, and he got a master's in history, and his dad had a history degree, PhD in history, and so he got a master's. We went to Conway. Actually, we had a baby. I guess we'd been married about a year and a half, and he's in school, and I'm teaching, and we were not very smart, but you just did those things back then and didn't worry too much about it. But he got a master's, and then we went to Conway, South Carolina, where it was the first year that Coastal Carolina had been a part of the university system. Before that, they'd been a junior college started by the College of Charleston, and then I think maybe the county, maybe Horry County had. Now I'm not absolutely sure about that, but anyway, they had that year become a part of the university system. So Joe was hired to go down there and teach history, and we loved Conway. And it made such good friends there. It's just a great town. Yeah. Then, after 2 years, we realized he needed to go on and get his PhD if he wanted to stay in education. So we went back to Columbia then. And by that time, we'd had a second child in Conway. And so we went back to Columbia, and I taught school, and he went to graduate school, and we finally had a third child. And so after 2 years in Columbia, then he was hired at Wofford College to teach history. So we moved to Spartanburg in 1964 and have been here ever since.
Wow. And your husband was a history professor at Wofford College that went on to become president of Wofford College?
Right.
Wow.
So we've just had the most wonderful experience being part of an educational institution that you could really get into. I mean, I'm sure big universities are wonderful. Joe he really didn't plan to stay at Wofford forever, but every time something else would come along, we'd think, well, for our family's sake and for his career, which he did consider, but that wasn't the biggest thing. But we just loved being at Wofford, and still are probably too involved. He's been retired from the president's office for 15 years. But after a year, he started volunteering with the football team. Because when we married, he was planning to be a football coach. So he always laughed and said, well, it took him a while, but he finally got around to being a football coach.
And you two have 3 children?
4. We ended up having another one after we got to Spartanburg.
Okay,
So
4 children. What was it like raising children within an educational environment like that?
It was great. It was really good. We felt like they had opportunities to meet people, special, I guess, I was trying to remember now exactly the time frame, but after President Ford was no longer president, he visited the campus one time, and our children, our oldest daughter at that point was away in school in Europe, but the younger 3 got to meet a former president, which was kind of exciting for them, and a lot of different people that we felt like they had good experiences to meet, and living on campus. The girls sometimes didn't like that. Our two daughters were the older of the children, and the boys, of course, loved all the athletic stuff. Especially our oldest son, who was the third child, actually probably spent too much time, learned too many four-letter words early on.
Too much time on campus.
Right, but they all enjoyed living on campus, though, I'm sure, and we enjoyed this big old house we had. My whole extended family enjoyed that, because I would have all the family dinners and everything, because, big rooms, and anyway, it was really nice. And I remember thinking in the summer, when people would be gone and I would drive back on the campus to go home, I would think, this is not going to last forever. You're going to get kicked off one of these days. Because it was like being on this big estate, in the summer when not many people were around. But we loved the time that the kids were there too. So the house we lived in was between some of the dorms and the dining hall. So people were constantly up and down the driveway, and, I had a hard time learning names, but I knew faces just all the time.
Right.
So, and
that's wonderful. So you had two older daughters, two younger sons.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about them, what they are today, what they're doing, ages, and things like that.
I'm proud of all four of them. They're all doing very different things. They all four went to different schools. Our oldest child, is the only one who actually graduated from Wofford. She kind of had a hard time figuring out what she wanted to do, and went to two different schools before she came to Wofford, but then she ended up graduating, and she graduated in 3 years. So then went on and started work on a master's, but ended up getting married. But anyway, she's a teacher now. She teaches first grade in Asheville, North Carolina.
So that's your oldest daughter.
That's my oldest. My second daughter fulfilled my ambition and did go to medical school.
Oh, wow.
And she's a pediatrician in Greenwood, South Carolina.
That's wonderful.
And then our oldest son went to law school, but they all four did a summer internship with Senator Hollins in Washington, and they all loved that. And we've always been sort of a political family, and so Joey was our oldest son, and he just really enjoyed that summer time in Washington with Senator Hollins. So when he graduated from college, he went to a little school called Birmingham Southern that's in Alabama, and we knew the person who was Senator Hollins' office manager. And Joey had talked to him and said, if anything comes up that I can do, I will do anything. And so he had applied to law school and had actually gotten in. We weren't sure if he was going to get in or not, but he did. But right at kind of at the last minute, Ashley Thrift was Senator Hollins' office person. Mm-hmm. And he called and said he had just a gopher position. So we had to still help him a little bit financially, because he can't live in Washington on what they paid him. But he just had the best year, and he really got to know Senator Hollins because he was his driver. So they would be in the car. He would have 30 minutes, 45 minutes with Senator Hollins by himself.
Wow.
So he came home with all these wonderful Senator Hollins stories. I don't know if you know him or not or know about him, but he is the funniest man you will ever meet. So Joey is a good imitator too. So he has great Senator Hollins stories.
Great opportunity to have that one-on-one time.
Absolutely. And Joey had to learn quickly how to get around in Washington because he would be the driver. But anyway, that worked out great. So then after that year, he went on to law school. Joey did, and then ended up going back to Washington with Senator Hollins and stayed there until he retired. Senator Hollins retired, but now he works for a company called Cox Communications. They're diversified, so they have the cable company around Atlanta, Cox Cable, but they also have a lot of different things. But Joey's still in Washington. He's their legislative something. He's taught me to say something, and now I've forgotten what it is, rather than lobbyist. But
yes.
it's sort of a lobbyist.
Yes.
Legislative liaison or something like
I
that.
think that's right. Very good.
So anyway, and our youngest son went to Duke on an ROTC scholarship. Wofford has something called tuition exchange. So they have a group of schools you can pick from, and then if you get chosen by that school, then you get the same, you get free tuition, which is great. Our daughter, who went to medical school, ended up going to William and Mary, and that was not tuition exchange, and Duke was not tuition exchange. So Harry ended up going on a ROTC scholarship. So he went in the Army a little while, got married, and then he went back to graduate school and got a history PhD. So he worked at the university for a little while. The bicentennial was about that time when he was looking for a job. But he ended up working for something called the Conservation Fund. So he got a PhD in history, but kind of decided maybe he really wanted to stay in the Southeast. And at that point, the only history jobs available were like Kansas or North Dakota or somewhere like that.
Right.
And he and his wife didn't really want to go out there. So he worked for the Conservation Fund, and then Mayor Riley in Charleston, Joe Riley, who is just the most wonderful person, was looking for an office person. And I think because Joey had worked for Senator Hollins, who's from Charleston, then Harry kind of heard about the job with Mayor Riley. So then they moved to Charleston, and he worked for Mayor Riley for about 8 or 10 years, and then Mayor Riley, is retiring.
Right.
So a couple of years ago, Harry realized he had to get a real job. So, so he is doing something in Charleston now called the Charleston Parks Conservancy, and there's a woman, Darla Moore. Do you know who Darla Moore is? She's a South Carolinian who has made a lot of money. She gave the $20 million to the university for the Darla Moore Business School.
Yes.
So anyway, she, with some other people, had started this Charleston Parks Conservancy. So then Harry went to work for her in this parks thing. So,
Well, it sounds like you have raised 4 very successful children.
well,
You must be very proud.
I'm very proud of them. I'll have to say, it hadn't been easy. The thing that has disappointed me the most, I guess, about my children is 3 out of the 4 of them have been divorced. And they all have these wonderful children, and I just hate that these 9 grandchildren have had to go through the breakup of their parents' marriage. And all 3 of them have remarried wonderful people. And so I'm blessed in that area. But at one point I just thought, I cannot believe I have 9 grandchildren from broken homes. But, who knows? I wasn't there. So I wasn't in the middle of the relationship. So.
Well, so you've probably reflected a lot on the concept of motherhood. I mean, why don't you share with us, what does motherhood mean to you?
Well, and I think I have been the generation that, I grew up wanting to be just a stay-at-home mother. I really, once I knew I wasn't going to medical school, I really did not like teaching. I thought, if I have to earn my living teaching school, we're in big trouble. So I did always tell the girls I wanted them to have some way that they could support themselves. Because I felt like, even though, especially once Joe got to be president of Wofford, it was a team effort. I mean, we were together in it. So I did feel like I contributed my part. And he would tell you that we were equal partners. That's probably not true, but anyway, we looked at it that way. But and I, as a college president's wife, I went to lots of meetings, and so many after I'd been there a while, so many of the younger wives wanted to be paid, and I haven't heard much about that lately, but that kind of was a big thing for a while. I always knew I did not want to be paid because I wanted to be able to have the choice of, I'm sorry, I can't do that.
Right.
Wofford had been a men's college until, well, coeducation started just as Joe became president, and he's the one who actually carried it through, and women on campus, you know, living in dorms and everything had not been before he was president. But so the wife of the Wofford president really, it was not as demanding as some of the schools that were all women or even were co-ed, because women at Wofford were not, you were supposed to be in the kitchen. So anyway, I think my job was a lot easier than many people's. So I always wanted my children to know that they came first with me, that if they needed me not to go to some banquet in alumni meeting in Bennettsville or wherever, then I didn't go. So, because they knew Joe was going to go. You know, he loved them, but his job was first with him. So I definitely think women's roles have changed. I do think some young women that think they can do it all put too much pressure on themselves, because I don't think they can do it all. But maybe their husband is cooperative and helps. I think my sons certainly help so much more than their dad did. But everybody's different. And I think each woman and her husband have to work it out for themselves. I don't think you can say this size fits all.
I think you're right. I think one of the toughest issues women face today is probably trying to balance work outside the home with work inside the home. That could be employment, volunteerism, community service, you know, all those things.
Right.
Talk a little more about how you were able to balance with the activities, the work you were doing inside the home, the work I'm sure you were doing outside the home, the activities you were involved in as a wife of a college president, or activities in your kids' school and the community.
Right.
Tell us about some of the activities you were involved in, and then how you were able to balance everything you were doing, raising 4 kids.
Yeah. Well, I think I was what I would say a community volunteer. While I was on a lot of boards and committees, I was on the, at that point, Spartanburg had something called the County Board of Education, and that's been done away with now. We have 7 districts in the county, and at that point, the county board was sort of an umbrella board over these other 7 districts. We didn't have a lot of to do with day-to-day activities in the districts at all, but we did look at their budgets and have some other oversight activities, and so I ran and got elected to that.
Wow.
I am going to have to stop.
Okay.
I've got maybe I need a drink of water because I've got a tickle, and I knew there's no point in keeping on.
Yes, please, get some water.
I always have my water bottle by me.
Well, I don't usually talk this much.
Yeah.
Oh dear. I didn't mean for it to have to.
Yeah, it's okay. So you currently live in Spartanburg?
Yeah.
My sister graduated last year from USC Upstate.
Oh, she did.
But she just moved back down to Charleston, so it's nice to come back up
So,
here.
so are you from Charleston? Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Are you
Yeah,
from Charleston?
Somerville, South
Too, if you
Carolina.
need one.
Thank you. That's
Thank
crazy.
you. I've gotten you a glass of water because I know it's so easy.
Well,
Once you get started talking,
I was going to say, I don't usually talk this much, so I didn't realize how I would
well,
need
you're
it.
doing great. That's so interesting.
I think we were thinking about activities, so
We're still on.
have you
on
started
camera?
again?
Are we
Oh,
on?
I just kind
Oh, you
of
keep going.
yeah.
Okay, so we'll edit all this out.
Okay, good.
So we're back to activity.
Anyway, I think I was on the County Board of Education for 12 years. And during that time, my children were in school. it was a tough time for schools back then because I was elected. I was trying to remember exactly what year, but anyway, in 1970, I think, is when all the separate districts were done away with, and not the separate 7 districts, but the white district and the black districts.
Mm.
There were no longer 2 high schools in District 7, which is where we lived. And so it was a period of adjustment. And living on campus, Wofford is in sort of the wrong side of town. So our children, and we really wanted to keep them in public schools. Actually, we never thought about anything else because, for one thing, we couldn't have afforded it. But some of the schools they went to were not that great. And I guess that's one reason I got involved, because I saw the schools on the right side of town getting some advantages that the schools where my children were not getting. And so I was able to make my voice heard. And I felt like, there was a different system of electing or appointing the local board members, and I could see that we had some women. When I went on the county board, there were the person that prayed used to pray for these gentlemen in their deliberations, and I used to think, I guess they don't think I need to be prayed for.
Were you the only woman on the body?
Right.
Wow.
And in most of the districts, there were no women. So I saw it do it in District 7. Now, there was a black man on the District 7 board, but there were no women. And as time went on, we had more blacks appointed because it was heavily, the school population was heavily black. And we had women appointed. So even after I'd been on the board for 12 years, I had decided I was not going to run again. So they gave me a plaque, and it said, "We want to thank Ruth," I don't know exactly the wording, "for all of his service." On the plaque, after I'd been there for 4 years, I gave it back to them, and they fixed it.
And you said, was that after 12 years of service? And you were elected. You were not.
I was elected.
You had to run for your position.
I did.
Several times.
Yes, I guess it was 4 years because
Wow.
I had to be elected. I had to sit up there and check all those names on you had to get names on a petition. It was not it was not Democrat or Republican, whatever I was trying to say.
Like
anyway,
nonpartisan.
nonpartisan. Thank you so much. It was a nonpartisan, so you had to get a certain number of petitions. And the first times, it wasn't that many, but the last time there were a lot because you had to check each name to be sure they, were in the right district because they couldn't. If they didn't vote in District 7, then they couldn't sign the petition.
And your children were school age when you were serving.
Yes, but I really enjoyed that and felt good about having done that. And other things I did, I was involved with my church. Wofford is Methodist, has always been Methodist related. So, and we were Methodists anyway, but I was involved at the church and all those church activities that you do. I was on several boards in a juvenile justice thing. I remember that I was very interested in that. And there was something called the Girls' Home and the Boys' Home in Spartanburg, and friends were involved with them. So I think that was one thing. And then I was on something called the Human Relations Committee for the city, and I really liked doing that. By the time I was on that, though, about that time, my mother and I had an elderly aunt who had never married, needed care. And at that point, my aunt and then my mother, 2 years later, moved to a retirement home in Spartanburg. And I pretty much got off of most of my community things at that point, just because I was very involved with them.
That's a very important role I think that women often play is health,
Caretakers, yeah.
healthcare advocates and practitioners in their own families.
Right. And Joe's parents had been ill, and he was very involved, especially his dad, because his mother died, and then his dad was there to be cared for. But we had grandchildren early on, so I've always been very involved with them.
How did you become a member of the South Carolina Mothers Association?
That's interesting because my oldest daughters, about the time they approached me first, I'm not quite sure, but I always felt like it was Mona Ruth Davis who probably suggested me. Now, Anne Touche might know, because you really, it was a self-perpetuating committee, so the members of the committee came forward with names to be considered. So Mona Ruth was from Greenwood and had lived in 96 when her daddy was a Baptist preacher, and she was my oldest sister's age, I think, and she was she was so pretty. She was the beauty queen at Furman when she was a student at Furman. But anyway, I don't know that she's the one that suggested me, but we had kept up with them over the years. Her husband, Erskine is an ARP school. I don't know if you know what ARP is or not, but it's Associate Reformed Presbyterian.
Okay, yeah.
It's a form of Presbyterian. It's very conservative. And Mona Ruth's husband's family had Erskine ties because he was on the board at some point. So my husband and her husband got to be good friends, and of course she and I had known each other for years. I don't know that she's the one who suggested me, but when they came to me the first time, my oldest daughter's husband, her first husband, had been in a motorcycle accident and became a quadriplegic. And so I was very involved in helping her, because at that point she had 3 children. Her youngest one was 18 months old. Her husband had been a dentist, and of course he could no longer do that. And it was just kind of a tough haul for a while to get adjusted. They did end up divorcing. They'd had all kinds of problems. She probably should have. Well, she had left him a few times and come home, but I'd always counseled her to go back, and then I felt bad about it because I felt like, you can do this. But anyway, so the first time they asked me, I said, I just, can't even consider it. But about a year later, I can't remember exactly, and I don't even remember who called me, whether it was Gwen Howell or who. But anyway, I decided then that it was something I would like to do.
And how did your service on the committee impact you or your family or your community? Talk to us a little bit about the experience serving on the committee.
Well, I just loved getting to know the other committee members. It was just a group of just fine women who you would want to be just like. I always felt like I was finding these wonderful role models. And I guess that's what I even thought then, though, I wanted to be sure that things were, that at that point there were just all these white women. But now I'll have to say that before I even went on the committee, there had been black mothers chosen, there had been an Asian mother chosen. So it was not, I didn't feel like it was like because the school board was definitely, not very, anyway, needed to be expanded. But this group was not, I didn't feel like they were racist. But we did, I think we had maybe, anyway, it was just a great group, and I always enjoyed meeting the new mothers, and I had some ties with some of the ones that were chosen. One of the mothers chosen had a son to play football at Wofford, who we had known, Joe and I had known. He was one of like 12 children, and they were very modest, didn't have a lot of money, and lived around Lake City. And so I had known the one at Wofford, but had not known that much about the others. But all of them had gone to college, and they were teachers or nurses or I've forgotten what else. But there were like this huge amount of children, 12 children, and this mother saw that they all went to college, and I just loved the fact that she was chosen as a Mother of the Year, and several of them were people that you really could admire.
So it sounds like you met some amazing women.
I did.
Were
Members of the committee as well as the mothers, and then I got to meet the mothers, the past mothers, the ones, because in the spring meeting a lot of them would come, and I had known one of them. One of them was her husband had gone to Wofford, and her son had gone to Wofford, Ms. Carolyn Watson from Bamberg. And I loved her because I had just loved her son who had come to Wofford. And it was funny, when we first moved on the campus, Joe was the dean, so we lived in one house, and the president was in the president's house on the campus. But everybody had little children. So these kids, who all went to the same church, they were all little Methodist children, decided they had heard about this doctor from Bamberg who went on mission trips. So they decided they wanted to try to raise money for Dr. Watson's mission trip. So they had a little garage sale. I don't know whether they made $25 or not, but anyway, they gave their money, wanted to send their money to Dr. Watson, and it turned out later then that was Carolyn's husband.
Yeah.
And so
We were able to interview her.
you've already
It's an
interviewed
amazing
her.
family.
Isn't she great?
She's wonderful.
And her son,
her.
the one that I knew the best, who came to Wofford, I was just reading about him just in the Wofford thing. He was, I don't know if he still is, but president of the Bar Association for the state, and all these. But her husband also just did all these great things.
What was it like going to the governor's mansion? Did you participate in any of the ceremonies?
Well,
most of the year?
I always went when I was a member of the committee, and I loved just being in the mansion. It was just, to me, it's just South Carolina. I know I had been there once. We actually got to spend the night there one night when Dick Riley was the governor. Joe was on this committee called Committee for the Future of the South. And Dick Riley at that point was the governor chairmanships moved around, but that was his year to be the chairman. So the committee was meeting with him, so he invited Joe and me to spend the night in the governor's mansion, which I thought was just exceptionally exciting. So then I did love going back and seeing. Have you been in the mansion?
I have not.
If you ever have a chance, it's, all the everything is historic and so interesting and so beautiful. I think they've done a great job with it.
So good. Okay, so I'm going to ask you just some broader questions about women in society now. So let me know, tell us this. What do you think are the most important issues facing women today?
Well, I think the most important issues facing women, or the most important issues facing everybody, is, our government, our foreign policy, what's happening in the world. And I think women need to be involved, because I think women have a different, just have a different perspective. And that's really, really important. So
That's a great answer. I don't think anyone has said that yet. And that's I teach political science, so I
Really?
have to agree with you
Yeah.
that women, two things, that we need to care about what's happening in the political world around us, from
Exactly.
the local to the global, and that maybe women bring a different perspective, and perhaps because women mother could be part of the fact that women bring a different perspective.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that's so true. I think it's hard sometimes to be able to do that, because I do think women are, like, I know I'm so much more aware of my children, what's going on in their lives. And when I meet people, especially people I've known before, I want to know about their children, and men just, I guess, don't really have that personal feeling about people as much, because their mind is concentrating on other things. Let's see how to say it. I don't know exactly, but
it may have a lot to do with the way boys and girls are raised, right? Historically, men and women have been raised to have these
so
two different roles,
different.
right? What's considered
Exactly.
women's work and what's considered men's work. Do
Exactly.
you think that's changing at all? Do you think men
I
are
do.
becoming more parts of, in terms of fathering and family?
Exactly.
And,
I definitely do, because I see my sons just so much more involved. And Joe was always involved, but he was busy. He had what was going on at Wofford, and
right.
and those were the things that he was really concentrating on. And we had he just felt like I could handle it. It wasn't.
Right.
I know when our fourth child was, well, I'm getting too personal. You wanted this to be.
No, that's good.
All right, this is when my fourth child was born. It was the first year of the Wofford interim, and the Wofford, it's a month in January that's not connected to either semester, and everybody's supposed to do very different things. So that was the first interim. He had been appointed the assistant dean in charge of the interim that summer before, so this was his baby. But he had planned a trip to Mexico with another faculty member. Because at that point, he was the dean. He was not the president.
Right.
But it just happened that I got pregnant. And we were expecting a baby when he was expecting a trip to Mexico.
Wow.
But
What happened? What did you do?
Well, the baby was late, so it was time for him to go to Mexico, and he left. He left me in the hospital and went to Mexico. But my parents were around, and his parents were around, and we were very lucky. We always had lots of help from our parents. My dad died early on, but my parents came and stayed, and when I got out of the hospital, then I think Joe's mother stayed while I was in the hospital, and then my parents came when I got out. I remember Joe's mother came and brought me home from the hospital because he was in Mexico. But, I was not worried about it. I knew I could handle it, and he knew I could handle it.
I was just going to repeat that same sentence. I think you said it beautifully. He knew I could handle it. In other words, he was the president of Wofford College. You were the president of the family. I mean,
Right.
In many ways, the mother is the leader, the executive leader of the family, and he knew you could handle it. You knew he could handle it.
Right.
Do you think women's roles and women's work as mothers, as kind of leaders of their families, do you think that work of women and mothers is recognized as much as it could be or should be in society?
I don't know about that, because I do know for a while when we would go to these education meetings, and I know one time they said, now I want everybody to go around and tell what they do, and I was panicked. I thought, what do I do? I hated to just stand up and say I was the wife of the president. I wanted some other identification. But basically, that's what I was. But I do think women that stay at home now sometimes don't get the recognition they deserve. I don't know.
I think, I'll just speak for me. When I started doing interviews, I went to Mozambique and Nicaragua. I conducted interviews with women in different in those two
Mozambique
countries.
and Nicaragua.
Nicaragua.
Oh, interesting.
I
Now,
wrote-
I'd like to see your interviews
Well,
from that.
I wrote a book called Women's Activism and Feminist Agency in Mozambique and Nicaragua. And one of the things I learned very early on was not to ask a woman, do you work? I realized that was such a ridiculous question.
Right.
Because all women work around
Right.
the globe. The question was more, do you work inside the home? Do you
Right.
work outside the home?
Right.
Or both? And I think that's getting a little bit at what you're talking about. As the first lady, as the Wofford first lady or the wife of the president, you were not employed by Wofford.
Right.
You certainly had a lot of work to do
Right.
for your family and for
Right.
Wofford, and to keep
Exactly.
to ensure that your husband could do what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think historically we haven't paid enough attention to that unpaid work that
Right.
women do, whether it's community service or activism or parenting. And I think your life is just a great testament to,
Wow.
what I hope is becoming greater recognition. This
Right.
research project is trying to give greater recognition to all
Right.
of the work that women do.
Well, I know somebody gave me a refrigerator magnet early on that said every mother is a working mother.
Exactly.
So I thought that was
that's
a good.
And I loved how you said earlier, I didn't want paid work for Wofford. I wanted to be able to say no
Well,
when I could and when I needed to know that my children were first. I wanted them to
exactly,
know that.
exactly.
And so that is a tough balance. I mean, I think you've already addressed this, but if there's anything else you want to say about how, what you have done or how young women today, especially if husbands and wives are both working, that
Mhm.
question of balance, working for a wage outside the home and working inside the home and balancing activism and
Right.
volunteerism in church and community. How are women able to do that balance?
Well, and that's why I say every couple has got to work it out for themselves. And you know, if you and your husband agree that this is going to be your focus and that's going to be his focus, or if you both, you know, if it's equal there, how do you work it out? But you got to work it out between the two of you. But the children need to understand, and I think mine always did. They just knew they came first with me, and they knew Joe was busy. But I mean, he was a good father. I don't mean to sound like he was not a good dad. He was a good dad.
What does feminism mean to you?
It means women having a choice, and having. I mean, if you choose to have 16 children and stay at home with them, that's your choice. But you also could choose to have 2 children or no children. And I respect people who choose to have no children. It's having a choice is the way I see it. And I would like to think I am a feminist. Some women don't want to be called a feminist, but I know I read The Feminine Mystique early on, and it really, you know, it made me think. And I don't think there's any question but that over the years, women didn't have rights early on. You know, you read all the, oh gosh, I know there's a woman here who's always promoted Susan B. Anthony. And she used to have a luncheon on Susan B. Anthony's birthday, February 15th. If y'all don't know that, that's Susan B. Anthony's birthday. So this year she didn't have a luncheon, but she sent out a card that I loved what it said. It just said, all these young women need to remember that all these rights you have, somebody worked really hard to get them. They didn't just happen. And so you need to appreciate that.
Oh, that's so well said. And my students at Winthrop University they read Betty Friedan, they read about the feminine mystique, and I think what Friedan called the problem that has no name. Where she kind of talked about women kind of waking up and doing all the things that were expected of them as wives and mothers, and kind of wondering, is this all?
Right.
Is this everything that my life was meant to be? And so I think you said it beautifully. If that's a woman's choice, then that is to be highly respected.
Right.
But making sure women have all the choices available to them that men have. I agree with you 100% that that's one of the legacies of feminism.
Right.
That the women have, for several generations, have fought for to ensure that women today can make those choices. Very well said. Do you have any questions for us, or anything you want to add to our conversation?
Well, is there interest in the material in the archives about the women's committee, the mothers committee and everything?
I think there is interest. I think part of it is getting the word out that it's there. And so at first we just kind of collected papers and pictures. So we had an exhibition in March of 2015 for Women's History Month. And that's when we announced that we were engaging in this project, the Oral History Project. And so once the interviews are transcribed and up on the digital commons, I think we'll have another kind of event to unveil, let everyone know that they're there. But I think there's great interest We have a Women's and Gender Studies minor at Winthrop. It's with
Oh, you do? Oh, good.
Disciplinary Studies Department. So
Mhm.
it's a minor, it's not a major.
Right.
But I direct the program, and there's great students like Michaela and Rachel who are working on this project. And there's real excitement. There's a lot of programming around Women's and Gender Studies. And so I think there is a lot of interest to have this kind of conversation about women's rights and feminism across time and through the generations and how things have changed. And so thank you so much, because your
it was my
contribution, your
pleasure.
role as the First Lady of Wofford and your role as a mother of four and on the school board and all the things that you have done, you've been a very active woman and mother. You help model for other women some of the choices they can make. You help them think about being intentional about the choices that they make as well.
Well, I know it's hard. I see my children, especially my daughters, trying to have a career, not really, but mainly just to put bread on the table, put food on the table, have a job,
Right.
but also be a good mother. So, and motherhood so often is not easy, because you never know whether you've done the right thing or not, especially if things don't turn out too well. You wonder, what could I have done differently?
Right.
But you play the hand you're dealt.
You do the best you can. It's certainly on-the-job training.
Exactly.
I have a 5-year-old, so
Oh me. Well, we have 11 grandchildren, and 11, and now our youngest son has remarried, and his wife has 2 younger ones. The second husbands of the girls both have daughters, but they've all been older, and somehow they've never really become a part of our family. But these younger 2 of our youngest son's second wife are definitely a part of our family, and it's great.
Any final questions or thoughts for us?
Oh me. Motherhood, life, everything. I tell you, I will give you a piece of advice to put, and that is be able to laugh no matter what happens. If you can just not take yourself and everything quite as seriously, then things get maybe just a tiny bit easier.
That's very good advice. Very good advice. Thank you so much.
You are so
for giving us your
welcome.
time today.